I got Emmanuel's business card and it just had his address. And I asked him, well, how do your, furniture, like he does custom furniture. So how do your customers get in touch with you? And he said, well, they write letters to him. In this video, I'm going to tell you about where the Amish live in North Carolina, a little bit of the background about the Amish in those communities. Now, there are just two communities in North Carolina, and these two settlements are quite different from each other. You could say they're actually on two different extremes of the Amish world in some sense, and you'll see what I mean as I go through the two. I'm also going to talk about some of the things you can do when you visit each of these communities. This is actually going to be the first in a series of videos outlining the different Amish communities in specific states. Decided to start with North Carolina since it's my home state, and just recently was visiting both of the two communities in North Carolina, and thought it would be a good place to start. So North Carolina is not a state that's really well known for an Amish population. The total Amish population in North Carolina is quite small. This is not Pennsylvania or Ohio or Indiana or one of those big Amish states. That said, there is a noteworthy Amish population in two locations in the Tar Heel State. The first Amish community I'm going to go through is the one at Union Grove. This is a small community. It's a single church district in size. So it's located near a small village called Union Grove, which is about 40 minutes west of Winston-Salem, about 20 minutes north of Statesville. So the Union Grove community was started way back in 1985, originally by Amish from Kentucky. This is an unusual, I don't want to say unique community, but it's an uncommon community. Now, it's a horse and buggy Amish community. You'll see all the things you kind of expect to see in an Amish settlement. The plain clothes, you have the buggies. I mean, these are Amish. This is a group of New Order Amish, and that's a certain specific type of Amish. Now, they have some differences with the Old Order Amish. It sounds like they might be the type of Amish that drive cars or use a lot of high technology, and that's not the case. It's been said that the New Order are actually kind of a subset of the Old Order Amish. The Amish in this group tend to be more mission-oriented. They've been described as having more of an evangelical element within the church. What does that translate to? It tends to mean that they're, I would say on average, more open towards outsiders. And in fact, when people join the Amish, they often end up in New Order communities, it seems. Not always, of course, but New Order Amish tend to be some of the more open ones towards what you'd call seekers, people that are potential converts to the Amish. So this is a New Order group, but what makes them even more unique than that within the New Order Amish churches is that they are from a group that's been called the Electric New Order Amish. What that means is that they actually are, unlike the vast majority of Amish, they connect to public power. So they use public power in their homes. Now, that doesn't mean they have televisions and computers and all the technology that we use. They're still thoughtful about technology. They still limit technology, but they have decided that having a connection to public electricity is something that they can have and still maintain an Amish identity. And they're still considered to be an Amish church. But you could probably describe them as about the most progressive in some ways of the horse and buggy Amish. So most New Order Amish churches do not permit public electricity. So this is like a subset within the New Order Amish group. You may see them using tractors for transportation. Last time I was there, I saw an Amish boy driving down the road in a skid loader. Okay, so they do permit, a higher level of technology than the other North Carolina community that I'm going to talk about in this video. So this community, what will you find there? Now, don't go there expecting Lancaster County if you've been to Pennsylvania or Holmes County, Ohio, or one of these larger communities, because as I said, it's a small community. There are not that many homes there. There are not that many businesses, but there are a couple businesses I'll highlight for you here that you may enjoy if you go visit this community. The biggest attraction there is a place called Shiloh General Store. Primarily, it's got foods, bulk foods. It's got a deli. You can order a sandwich there, like a custom sandwich they'll make for you. Dairy items, you've got pies, you've got some baked goods, breads. A nice store to visit, very popular if you go there. If you go there on the weekends, there tends to be a lot of cars there. They actually have expanded since they first got started. So I spoke with the owner briefly, so they expanded in 2017. I actually spoke with the owner's son as well. This store had actually been featured on a news report, I think a year or two prior. I had recognized the the young man from the news report, and he was running the cash register that day. And he told me actually that after that report, the business about doubled. So that was a nice, powerful piece of advertising for this Amish store. Another interesting thing he shared is that actually during the COVID pandemic, they didn't really see that their business dropped. They sell a lot of your kind of basic necessities, like, well, food, really. So that's a bulk of their sales. So people obviously aren't going to stop eating during a pandemic. There are some health items there. Last time I was there, I saw they were selling quilts. They were selling some kind of craft things. They had some Amish dolls they would sell. So, which was interesting to me because I'd actually, I think a year or two before, visited an Amish store in Virginia, had also seen some doll for sale there. And actually the woman running that store didn't want to sell it to me. So that was actually a little bit more of an off the beaten path store, which I'll talk about in my video on Amish in Virginia. Very oriented to the non-Amish public, and definitely recommend stopping there if you are in the area. Another little business worth stopping is actually just down the road from the Shiloh General Store. It's called the Wholesome Country Creamery. This is a much smaller business. It's a little store where they sell dairy products. They sell milk, they sell yogurts, they sell some delicious ice cream. I've had a pumpkin flavored ice cream. I think I was there in autumn one time. I've had butter pecan there before, and last time I was there I got maple nuts, which was excellent as well. They had maple syrup. Simple store, but worth a stop. You know, once you go to the Shiloh General Store, I like to swing down there and see what they have. There are some other businesses in this community as well. There's a furniture business there, at least one furniture business there. There's a sheds business there, like outdoor structures business. I think that's owned and run by the bishop of this settlement, if I'm not mistaken. So there's several businesses here, and the two most, I would say, visitor friendly or just easiest to visit would be the two that I mentioned, Shiloh General Store and then the Wholesome Country Creamery. But if you're in the market for furniture or outdoor structures, they also have those kinds of businesses as well. So switching to the second Amish community in North Carolina, this is a settlement near the town of Ellenboro in Rutherford County. It's about an hour west of Charlotte and about an hour or so from Asheville, kind of in between the two. This is a community, as I mentioned, quite different from the Union Grove New Order, Electric New Order Amish. The Amish who live at Ellenboro are from the Swartzentruber group, and this is perhaps the most conservative of all Amish. They're the plainest, the most traditional, the most resistant to change. They use pretty much the most limited technology of any Amish. They don't use the orange safety triangles. They feel that's too bright and too gaudy. They feel that's a man-made symbol that they don't want to have on their buggies. So they use other means of attracting attention when they're traveling on the road. They actually use some strips of reflective tape. Swartzentruber Amish in certain communities have done some little adaptations as well, depending on the community. And this is one of them. And they actually have an additional one or two like kind of white strips on the back of the buggy. They also hang like lanterns on the sides of the buggies. So they're not super visible in general or at night. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're traveling if you go to visit here. This is also another small community. So there's just one church district here. There's about, I think, 16 households when I was there. The Amish here originate from a couple other Swartzentruber communities, one in Tennessee and one in Mississippi. I actually, when I visited this community, there was an auction going on. So I got to see an auction in action at a local kind of Amish home there. It was kind of a farm auction where they were selling some farm equipment and some antiques, furniture, household items, wringer washers. At the auction, I had a chance to also buy from, let's call it another business. They had a stand of baked goods there. So they had fried pies and regular pies. They had peanut brittle there, which is something you see in these southern Swartzentruber Amish communities. They're not really dairy farmers here in this community. They have some small businesses. I visited a furniture maker and a kind of an outdoor furniture maker as well. Also a lady who sold soaps and candles. I actually spoke with Emmanuel, who's the owner of this furniture shop, and had a really nice conversation with him, a minister in the church there. And so he'd be kind of one of the preachers that preaches on Sunday when the Amish have church service, or rather every other Sunday, because the Amish don't have church every week. Nice guy, had a great sense of humor. The fact that the Swartzentruber Amish are the most traditional or the most conservative or plainest doesn't mean they're completely closed or don't want to have any contact with outsiders. In fact, I've actually found Swartzentruber Amish to be pretty friendly in the communities that I've encountered them. They're not going to adopt our ways, but it doesn't mean that they won't be cordial or friendly or even become friends with non-Amish people, even in these very plain groups. This is a very plain group, though, where most Amish will have like a phone access of some sort. Now, the Swartzentruber Amish, and that includes this group in North Carolina, Ellenboro, don't have any kind of phones, right? So, I got Emmanuel's business card and it just had his address. And I asked him, well, how do your, furniture, like he does custom furniture. So how do your customers get in touch with you? And he said, well, they write letters to him. So it's definitely the old-fashioned way of doing things. He has a portfolio there where he has photos that actually his customers have taken photos of the custom pieces that he's made, and then they send the photo to him, and he had it in kind of like a laminated folder there where you can kind of see examples of his work. So they kind of helped him build his portfolio so that he can show that to future customers just to give them an idea of what kind of quality work he does. And he had several pieces available there that we checked out, which was kind of neat to see. And he also had a printed flyer. I guess he had printed or someone printed for him. I also stopped at a lawn furniture shop that I mentioned owned by a man named Enos Gingrich. And his wife, Fanny Gingrich, was the one that makes soaps there. So she has a whole soaps and lotions, actually. So she has like a photocopied kind of flyer with all of the different types of soaps and lotions. Just neat little soaps, and she sold them for like $2 a piece. So this is just an example of a nice kind of home business that's pretty common among these plainer Amish, where they make a simple product and sell it right out of the basement in this case. And Enos had his own shop outside where he makes Adirondack chairs and rockers. So North Carolina does not have a lot of Amish, but it's kind of interesting that the two communities that the state does have represent sort of different ends of Amish society, so to speak. These two communities have a lot in common in some sense, in that they both use the horse and buggy, they both wear plain clothes, men have beards, women wear hair coverings, they speak Pennsylvania Dutch, they have church every other week, they have a practice of mutual aid that, where they'll help members in need in the community. So they have all the kind of things that Amish share universally. But there are definitely some differences between these communities, and if you go to visit both of them, you should definitely notice what I'm talking about. North Carolina has a history of Amish settlements, not a very long history, but it has a few examples of communities. In the 1990s, there were Amish from the Union Grove settlement that started a separate community in a town called Yanceyville, which was about an hour or so from Raleigh, Durham, northwest of it. This was a community that was started to be more seeker-friendly, so it was kind of meant to be bilingual or to use English, which some Amish had kind of recognized that the language barrier was a big hindrance to outsiders who wanted to join the community. They had an idea to start a community that would be more accessible in that way by having church service in English and just being more seeker-friendly in that sense. So this community was pretty short-lived. It lasted from 1994 to 2001. And eventually it kind of became a beachy Amish church, which is a group that has similarities to the Amish, but permit a higher level of technology. Simple way to describe it, there's more to it than that. But so the Yanceyville community actually did attract a number of non-Amish outsiders to join and convert to the Amish and join that community. Apparently they had so many converts in this church that at one time it even made up half of the families in the church. Another quite fascinating Amish settlement existed in the so-called Dismal Swamp area of northeastern North Carolina, kind of near the Virginia border. This was a community that started way back in 1918. It lasted about 25 years until the early mid-1940s. This is an area that was promoted by land agents who had drained parts of the swamp and were promoting it to Amish and other communities to kind of come and move there and settle. And that's a practice that was fairly common some years ago, where land agents would promote to Amish people in other communities to come settle a new, really attractive, area. And at least that's how these areas were promoted. It might not have always been, turned out that way. So apparently this settlement they had a special building that the developer put up that ended up being called the Amish Hotel, where new Amish families that had, moved to settle in that area would stay until they could set up, kind of their own home. The building was also used as a school and as a place to hold church for those Amish, which is kind of unusual for the Amish to have church in a building where they usually have it in the home. So Amish were able to farm and grow crops here. They grew mint in this community. There were a couple, let's call them hazards in this community, however, and one of them was the flammable nature of the sort of the dried swamp mud or muck. Apparently it was the case that fires would frequently start. Hunter could drop a cigarette and it would start a fire, and the fire would burn for a good time. So that was something that was not attractive about the area. Another thing was the presence of mosquitoes, which apparently had a pretty bad mosquito problem there, which would not be a plus. Another interesting thing here, over the entire history of this settlement, apparently only one minister actually ever lived there. So they weren't able to hold church very often. And when you look at Amish settlements that get started, and if you look at reasons why they don't grow, one reason is not being able to attract or to ordain a ministry, right? Because, to be Amish and to have church, you need to have preachers and ministers and to lead that. Apparently the settlement experienced a lot of turnover as well. The Amish here didn't even bury their dead here. If someone passed away, they would take that body to another Amish community in Virginia near Norfolk, which they had a rail connection to that area, and they actually buried their dead there. When the Amish left here, they didn't really leave a lot of traces behind. There's not even a cemetery there. And when you see other places where Amish had previously lived, that's usually the last sort of thing that would remain, is the cemetery, the gravestones from the Amish who lived in that area. There's a historian of the Amish named David Luthy who wrote a book called The Amish in America, Settlements That Failed, 1860 to 1940. That's a really interesting book, and that's where I'm getting some of this information from. So North Carolina, again, this is not a state that's gotten a lot of Amish settlements, but we have a couple of interesting Amish settlements that are worth visiting if you live in the States. I don't know that I'd drive hours and hours and hours, but if they're the closest Amish settlements to you, definitely worth a visit. If you'd like to visit the Amish and you're able to go to some, like a larger community, I would probably recommend that, just because there's more to do and see, and there's more businesses to visit, and they're more likely to have like an auction going on or things like that. But if these are the closest Amish settlements to you, or you live in North Carolina, you'd like to see how the Amish live in your state, I definitely recommend paying a visit to these two places. Just don't expect Lancaster County and buggies everywhere and farms and everything, because these communities don't really resemble, for example, that famous community. So I talked about just one state here. If you'd like kind of a general overview of where the Amish live, both in the United States and in other countries, I did a video on that. I've also got a video on the 10 largest Amish communities. So not the states, but the individual communities. You can check that out right here. Thanks for watching. Do me a favor, if you like this video, give it a like. That helps the channel. And I'll talk to you next time.